SEC Media Days 2024 is finally here, and so begins my personal favorite time of the year, the college football season. This year, the 4-day event is being held in Dallas and begins next Monday, July 15th. I'd say one of the most notable aspects of the event this year is the absence of former Alabama head coach Nick Saban. This will be the first SEC Media Days in almost 25 years where Saban is not in attendance. Also, next week will mark the first big media appearances as members of the SEC for newcomers, Texas and Oklahoma. For today's episode, Jeff Palermo, the news and sports director of the Louisiana Radio Network, and Tiger Rag magazine editor Todd Horne welcome Chris Gordy, the host of the Locked On SEC podcast, to preview the event. We'll hear Chris's take on Saban's absence, how he thinks Georgia is a team on a mission, and how, as far as Texas goes, he's not buying the hype. I'm your host, Jake McMains, and we'll be back with all that and more after a message from our sponsor.
July is jumping at your East Baton Rouge Parish Library. Lots of books are being read as part of their summer reading program. Adults are finding the way of nature through Tai Chi classes, while little ones gear up for back to school with enrichment programs like Big Buds and Carver Cubs. And for teens, how about Twinkie Wars, Bubble Science, or Percy Jackson Trivia? Go online at ebrpl.com to learn more. That's ebrpl.com.
Y'all ready? Yeah. Let's go. Come on.
Tiger Rag Radio is on the air.
Let's crank this thing up.
We're statewide, breaking down the latest happenings with LSU athletics.
This is us.
Hear from the coaches.
Put together a defense that puts us in a position to win the SEC.
The players.
Having fun and we working, baby. That's it, man.
The recruits.
Show some passion and some heart.
And those who cover the Fighting Tigers of LSU and the SEC.
All those things are going to be there, which are important.
It's 2 hours of nonstop LSU talk.
What a privilege. I mean, you get to represent LSU.
Tiger Rag Radio is brought to you by Cummins. Cummins creates power solutions that the world depends on. Helm Paint and Decorating. The paint experts of Louisiana. Louisiana Beef Industry Council. Max Home. And the East Baton Rouge Parish Library. Get ready to talk Tigers with producer Jackson Blackman and our hosts, Todd Horne and Jeff Palermo.
Three great players that are better people than they are players.
This is Tiger Rag Radio.
Hey, we're back on Tiger Rag Radio. Jeff Palermo, news and sports director of the Louisiana Radio Network, along with Tiger Rag editor Todd Horne. Joining us now on the Max Home Hotline, it is the host of the Locked On SEC podcast, Chris Gordy, joins us here on Tiger Rag Radio. Chris, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing a little bit better today.
Yeah.
As a New Orleans native, I'm no stranger to hurricanes, but man, that was a Cat 1 hitting Houston that felt like about a Cat 3 or a 4. That was, it was a pretty rough one.
Yeah, I heard it was it was not a meager Category 1 storm for sure. You got power back, or did you lose power?
Yeah, we got it back today, but probably a good bit of 40% of the city, I think, still without it. So, but look, I'm not telling you guys anything you've never heard. New Orleans, Louisiana, Baton Rouge, they're all used to this kind of stuff too. So, just kind of life living on the Gulf Coast.
Well, Chris, tell us something we don't know, and that's what is SEC Media Day going to be like? Media Days going to be like without Nick Saban there, and what the heck is Lane Kiffin going to talk about if Nick Saban's not around?
He's still going to talk about the transfer portal, right?
All right.
It's funny. Lane, for as much of a goofball as he is on Twitter, he's actually pretty reserved typically in these kind of settings, and it's a little disappointing because I used to get so excited covering SEC Media Days when Steve Spurrier was there, and Les Miles would always say something quirky, and we used to have a lot of guys that would make some headlines. And the last few years, it feels like guys are more buttoned up. It's like they go there wanting not to make headlines and giving boring sound bites about their team. I mean, Les Miles, I remember, would spend the first 20 minutes giving a rundown of what the Miles summer family vacation was. I mean, it was kind of like, come on, man, we're here to talk football. But yeah, it's just funny. Lane is very much of a rebel on Twitter. I mean, he'll retweet when guys transfer from A&M. I mean, he'll talk so much trash to anybody on social media, but in front of a microphone, he's usually pretty calculated. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what he says. It will feel weird without a Nick Saban there, though. I mean, guys. I mean, I go back to over a decade ago, going to the Winfrey Hotel there in Alabama, and I mean, it was like, I used to joke that the president could walk in. I think it was Obama at the time. I said Obama could walk in through the side door and Nick Saban would, all eyes would be on Nick Saban. I mean, like they wouldn't care if the president was in the room, and it was always like that. He always had a full police escort, and tons of weirdo Alabama fans camping out overnight just to get a glimpse of Nick Saban, and so it's going to feel weird without him there. And yeah, I mean, I know Kalen DeBoer is embracing the challenge, but we always said the day that Nick Saban retired, everybody else in the SEC was going to throw a party because, ding dong, the witch is dead. At least now, you don't have to deal with this legendary coach in the conference anymore. And so it's going to feel weird. It's going to be different. And then on top of it, you're bringing two new teams to Texas and Oklahoma. It's a lot of new and it's a lot of weird. I know a lot of people don't like change sometimes, but change is inevitable, and that's what we're going to have next week.
Talking with Chris Gordy, he's the Locked On SEC podcast. LSU will kick this thing off on Monday morning, Chris, and we're going to hear from Garrett Nussmeier. We're going to hear from Harold Perkins. We're going to hear from Mason Taylor. But LSU, when you look at it, it seems to me Georgia and Texas, those are the top two teams in the league, especially when you look at Texas's schedule. It's hard for them it'd be hard in my mind to think that they're not going to at least finish in the top three, unless they just completely pull a Texas, if you would. But then there's this group of schools, LSU, Ole Miss, Alabama, that I don't know, they could finish anywhere between third or seventh place, if you would. Oklahoma you could throw in there as well, despite how tough their schedule is. So how do you look at it as far as the message we're going to hear from Coach Brian Kelly come Monday morning?
Well, I'll say this. We like to look at the schedules and think we have it all figured out. Oh, this team has an easy schedule. This team has a hard schedule. But, we really don't know until we get into the season. I mean, who looked at their schedule last year and said, yeah, Missouri, that's going to be a really tough one. I mean, Missouri ended up being a 10, 11 win team last year. And, LSU, looking back on it, they were lucky to get out of Como with a win with Jaden Daniels being special that night. But, I've been one of the people kind of selling on Texas. I know that they're getting all the hype and everything around them, and people are just assuming they're one of the best teams. But I'm still not fully sold on Quinn Ewers being this elite-level quarterback. He's been really good, but go look at the two losses they had last year. The game against Oklahoma, he threw two bad early interceptions. Did lead the team on a game, what would have been a game-winning field goal drive, but the defense gave up a touchdown the other way to Nick Anderson, and Oklahoma wins it. And by the way, Oklahoma has just dominated that rivalry here in recent years, and we're all just going to assume, Texas is just going to beat Oklahoma. The other side of it, too, he played terrible in the playoff game against Washington for about 3 quarters. He finally turned it on in the fourth quarter, but it was too little too late. So on top of it, Quinn Ewers has been hurt. Each of the last 2 seasons he's missed a couple of games. So, I keep saying, what happens if Arch Manning gets in there and lights it up? Will he be Wally pipped? Will it be a scenario where you go, well, we can't take Arch out. He's red hot. So we'll see on that. I think there's a little bit too much hype for Texas this offseason with all they lost to the draft. And you lose a bunch of D linemen like Byron Murphy and Tavondre Sweat. I mean, you don't just replace those guys with incoming recruits. It usually takes a couple years for those guys to be replaced. And on top of it, look at Sark's track record. I mean, his best season at Washington was 8-5. His best season at USC was 9-4, and his best season at Texas prior to this year was 8-5. To me, that's more who Sark is as a head coach. He's an 8-9 win coach. It's pretty good, just not elite, where he's going to win 12 games every year and be in the playoff every year. So I'm a little pumped the brakes on Texas. I do think Georgia is on a mission. The whole three-peat, I thought they got robbed a little bit. They played a bad game in the SEC championship with a bunch of injuries, lost by 3 to Alabama, and yet somehow they're not one of the 4 best teams. I thought that was a little insane, and, I get it why they left them out, but Georgia's on a mission. Carson Beck's back. Malachi Starks is back. All these weapons are back for them. I think Georgia is going to be the cream of the crop and possibly go undefeated in the SEC. I know their schedule is tougher. They got to go to Texas. They got to play at Alabama. So there's some tough games on the schedule. But if anybody can do it, Kirby Smart's hands down the best coach in the SEC right now with Nick Saban gone. So I'm high on them. And then, you kind of have that next tier of teams with LSU and, what is Nussmeier, Tennessee, what is Nico Iamaleava. So you kind of have this hodgepodge of teams that, hey, if they put it all together, we'll see. But, obviously everybody's picking Ole Miss and Missouri to get back to double-digit wins. But to me, that's the biggest question is, a guy like Lane Kiffin, a guy like Eli Drinkwitz, always the bridesmaid, never the bride. Are you ready for prime time? This is a time where, the playoff, 12-team, playoff and expansion, if you can get to 10, 11 wins this year, you're going to get to the playoff. The only problem is Ole Miss. Their two toughest games are at LSU and home for Georgia, and if they lose both of those, they still go 10-2 and will probably be in the playoff. And so we'll see what happens. But again, like I've been looking at the schedules, and maybe this is just the dog days of the summer, but I started to kind of look at it in my brain and going, were we really talking about Missouri as a tough team last year? I know we thought Ole Miss was going to be good, but did we think that they'd be 11 wins good? So I think in hindsight, we're kind of looking at some schedules and go, it's an easy schedule, it's a hard schedule. Well, let's see it play out first and see who the real contenders are.
Well, to that point, I was just about to ask you. I thought you were going to hit on it without me asking there, but who would be your dark horse for 2024 in the SEC, similar to Missouri in 2023, since you spent so much time studying the schedules recently?
Yeah, I mean, to me, Oklahoma is very intriguing. Like, we forget that they won 10 games last year, and that was with Dylan Gabriel. Jackson Arnold was a highly touted five-star quarterback. You think of the run that Oklahoma's had with quarterbacks, from Baker Mayfield to Kyler Murray. I know some of those guys were transfers, but Spencer Rattler. I mean, these were all highly touted quarterbacks. Jackson Arnold's considered one of the best of that bunch in terms of what he was rated coming out of high school, and big five-star recruit. So if he can live up to the hype, I know it's a lot of pressure as a true freshman, or as a redshirt freshman, but he's got a lot of weapons around him. Nick Anderson set the Oklahoma freshman record for receiving touchdowns last year. He's back. They got a lot of weapons, a good running back, a good O-line. I just look at Oklahoma and say, yeah, the schedule's tough, man, but Brent Venables knows a thing or two about defenses. I mean, think about that. That guy sat and waited at Clemson until the right job came along, and he took Oklahoma. And you look at what he's done since he's been there. He's tearing things around defensively for them, particularly in the trenches. You look back at Lincoln Riley's track record. Yeah, he had awesome offenses. Yeah, he got to the playoff. But he got his butt whooped against every SEC team they played in the playoffs, giving up 50 points to LSU and Georgia and Alabama. So they wanted Venables to come in and change that mentality, and he kind of has so far. We'll see what this defense looks like. But, when you look at Oklahoma at SEC Media Days next week, bringing two defensive players, Danny Stutzman, their linebacker, and Billy Bowman, a safety, those are two big-time playmakers. So I just look at Oklahoma and say maybe we're giving too much love to Texas and maybe not enough love to Oklahoma. Because, again, if Jackson Arnold plays his role and let's say, throws 28 touchdowns to 6 or 7 interceptions and protects the football, I keep saying, guys, that last week of the season, there's a scenario where we're talking LSU and Oklahoma both 9-2, and that game basically becomes a de facto playoff game. Yeah. That the winner of the game gets to 10-2, and they're in the playoff.
Right. Well, and defense travels, and we had somebody from Oklahoma on a couple of weeks ago, and they were just raving about that defense. So you're sort of resonating in an argument that they're talking a lot about in Oklahoma itself with that defense. Is this Billy Napier's last season? Does he make it through the season?
It's interesting. On tomorrow on our show, we're going to have Ben Troop, the former Florida tight end, and he kind of said, look, man, at the end of the day, Napier's actually a good coach. It was almost like from the moment he got hired, he had a target on him. And Florida fans were like, you better win. And it's like, look, man, you got to give a guy time to build his program and time to get adjusted. And since he's been in Gainesville, that schedule's been absolutely brutal. They've done him no favors. Go look at the schedule this year. Their only guaranteed win is Samford. I mean, their non-conference games against Central Florida, Miami, Florida State, I don't know who set that schedule up, but it's absolutely brutal. And then you get into the conference games, and, I mean, there's no gimme on the schedule. So I think he's a good coach. I think he's a good offensive mind. Is he in over his head a little bit? Probably. But here's the quandary, guys. He just brought in the top quarterback in last year's recruiting class, DJ Lagway, who was the top player in the state of Texas. He is the real deal. I mean, watching him throughout the spring, I kept saying, this kid's got to play. And I know they've got Graham Mertz back, who's a good veteran who came in from Wisconsin, had a great high completion percentage last year in the SEC. But I almost compared it. I said, I remember when Chris Leak was the quarterback, they'd run in Tebow, and they found ways to get Tebow on the field. They put in packages. I feel like they kind of have to do that with DJ Lagway. But the problem is, if you're going to fire Napier, you probably lose Lagway. Mm-hmm. So I think if he can get to 6-6, get to a bowl game, they keep DJ Lagway, and Napier survives another year. But 5 wins or less, I think he's done.
Man, it's such a tough schedule there for Florida. Chris, thanks a lot. I know you've been going through a lot over there in Houston. Look forward to chatting with you as the season goes on, and keep up the good work as the host of the Locked On SEC podcast. Chris also does a show on Sports Talk 790 in Houston. So thanks a lot, Chris, for your time.
All right, that'll be it for today's episode. I'd like to thank Jeff, Todd, and Chris for the discussion. We'll be back next week, but until then, stay tuned to TigerRag.com for all your latest LSU sports news.